괜찮아. 꾼이 괜찮아. 말, 꾼.
Please press on the end of each row and pass them along. We begin by acknowledging the Wajapayana people, traditional custodians of the land on which we live today, and pay our respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples everywhere.
Chödang Soji Jonula, Sanju Bardu Dani, Gyabsun Chi, Dahi Chushi Gyabanda, Roland Benshi, Sangin Drupara Shu, Sanji, Chödang Soji Jonula, Sanju Bardu Dani, Gyabsun, Dahi Chushi Gyabanda, Roland Benshi, Sangin Drupara Shu, Sanji Chödang Soji Chonamla Chanchu Bardu Dani Kyabsun Dagi Chushi Yevanda Roland Benshi Sanji Drubarashu Kangi Tuzini Zone Tawa Tamshi Pambish Tambishun Tenze Kodam Tela Chanse Lo Amalaya Kedan Music Chunga Dami Ken
Welcome back, Emma. We're very happy to have you back again to continue on with the teachings, and welcome to those joining us newly this evening. And of course, special welcome again, Sondu. I'm not sure who's teaching tonight. I think maybe we're having a bit of a conversation. So we're just taking a moment to get Geshe online. So again, wasn't already. So we just have a little bit of a moment.
Ken Dorzila
He's not there yet.
not yet. Okay.
Yeah. It's
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry. We will have Gila translated. Egypt, Melbourne,
Everybody or just?
everybody, yes. And you can take this. 20. I think.
Oh, genla, kondu dele. Shine lebso. Shine lebso.
Parje Chongson.
Konda, ngadi kari Zoom anki sangwa anki yomade. Danda shine lebso.
And the last.
Sorry.
Ini shine lebso. Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry for being a little late, but here now.
Ken Dorjila, Tering onto the Kong Gitsenla, Gen Zunri, Kong Tanda, Kurdi Chebatazan, Pig Dharam Sagi, Kong Delapen Shudala.
Oh, gensundula, kondu dele. Sundu Tsultrim, dene pachen do kali kali jene do kiade.
Any Deri, the Yakshuja, Gen Zunri, the Pevati, Pegao Chongsons, Ra, any Nikansolia, Motrichedo, Zavi Kanso, Gen Zunri, the Deo Chondos, Ra. Any Namguden 균댕이 성을 갔던 것은 지금 다사다사라야데 춘중 권에 네 개초는 거 동바시 아니 라울로니 추진 체는 메시키에 등이 미디 나 잠블이 나와야 신도 근부레스 라 베니뇨레스 타든데 다치 롬반 딘디도질이야 아니 게논남다 아지 동나 링니 창상 돌아야 켄게 영이 지 라야디 신도네 근부레스 인자 아니 딘디지 캔슬라야 페베아티 조 겨울무치 투지 가된다 잡질라모 소보르무치 타든도 아니 그 디텐시로무치기 아니 전랍을 때니 중앙인바디 문제지 토와이나 안 캔슬라야 전랍 용그레스 캡산라그레스 야차 야타망이 샘딩니 이인스로
Good evening to everyone. So firstly, I just want to say I'm very pleased that Gensundru has joined us tonight, and more generally that Gensundru is here now residing in Perth. Because when we think about the incredible number of causes and conditions that are required for such a situation to come about, it really is quite remarkable. And thinking about it makes one value the preciousness of such a situation. So the causes that come together are manifold, but including thinking of how very rare it is in the world that amongst the vast number of beings, there is a smaller group that are human beings, and amongst the humans, there are so few who hold the vows or the ordained. And amongst those few who hold the vows or the ordained, whilst that is already a tiny number, and also as smaller components of that have held the vows for almost the entirety of their life. In other words, that were able to receive the vows of ordination at a young age. So I was able to do so, so was Gensundru, and this is something very rare and very precious. And now he's residing here in Perth. But that he resides here in Perth is due to a wide number of causes. Particularly, we can think of the kindness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all that he has made possible through his presence and activities in our world. Moreover, also the kindness of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, as well as Kirti Tsinsa Rinpoche. So thinking like this, then, you can recognize how you are receiving the blessings or the beneficial activities of these great beings of primarily His Holiness, but as well as Zopa Rinpoche and Kirti Tsinsa Rinpoche. That's all.
데레다 아니 겐 존중에 맞은 게 신금에서 가 가지라 제라 도스치온디 아니 달로 톰나델야 안 다름사 그 제바타산 슈니 에는 나레 망 아니 겐 존중에 야오롱지 콘데니 손주 터비어레스 랑아 호졸 데게자 뒤들마도 야오롱지 손주 만체 Chathu Marvasra. Gengi Gacha Gatama Nali Man Yavrunji Kundin Sunchu Toviores. Tadundu Kreditenjerumbachisın Samgi Mekebi Lama Lama Soborumbachedan Konza Tsama Gita Tsavi Lamata Yanamenare Dwasra. Kongi Kundini Wano Mengata Yons Soboroj. Any Kreditenjerumbachi Kundin Us Tobdingi Dili Redwasra. Ngadroji Ban Tsavi Kawasambure Tasala de Messi Tasala Kier Denia, could Senjurmus Kundun Sonju Tonyo Mes. Tinza, Gensonjula, Wano Menga, Cuba Yons Soba, Yoresta. Only China will give a Yons Soba Yores. Tindi Yonging Miji, Canada Lomba Delaya, Shendun Kalekabo, Raya Mejuch. Conjong Adi Sorudisro. Tinza kyanzi injimi dawa kyan gen dawa kyan ro gen gu kundu ni ani chi ongo menga shuda tele laga chi zawni ni go mares tele laga chi zawni go mares ro.
And prior to this visit to Perth, I haven't had the opportunity to meet Gensundru before. But but now that I have met him, come to know him, I see just how fortunate his life has been up to this point. He lived in Koti Monastery in Dharamsala for many years, as well as not just lived there and helping out in the monastery, but he taught there for many years. This is really quite a fabulous opportunity that he has had, an experience he has gained. And living in Dharamsala comes with many additional blessings. Most importantly of all, living in Dharamsala, one is living at the very feet of His Holiness. So compared to myself, Gensundru has had the opportunity to receive so many more teachings in this life from His Holiness. Because I lived in a monastery in the south, we regularly had teachings from His Holiness, but not nearly as often as in Dharamsala, which has been the primary place where His Holiness has taught. So Gensundru has received the blessings of those teachings on so many occasions, and remarkably fortunate. Moreover, living and then teaching in Koti Monastery for many years, he was able to receive teachings and initiations from the great Koti Tensab Rinpoche. And Koti Tensab Rinpoche is a remarkable Lama and teacher to so many great beings, such as His Holiness, Zopa Rinpoche, and so forth. And again, Gensundru, of course, was able to form a close Dharma relationship with this wonderful Dharma teacher. And for myself, whilst living in Seta Monastery in the south, I received countless blessings and benefits too. I wasn't able to make a connection with Koti Rinpoche in this life, but Gensundru was, and in a very deep manner too. And now you, here in Perth, residents of Perth, you have the great good fortune of having a Gensundru now living in your midst, bringing the blessings of his residence here in Perth. And because of the kindness of Zopa Rinpoche and others, your center is here. And thereby you and Gensundru have made this connection, and he is able to bring you Dharma teachings, help guide you in the cultivation of the Dharma within. And really, in our lives, what is more precious than that? Recognizing this then, recognize just how truly fortunate you are at this event, and really what blessings you hereby receive. That's all.
어디에다 간주 원참 징바레스로 간주 개첨부다 짜첨부디 짜첨부임바 원지 마투니 간주라야 간 타버도 경라샤고 망부슈요. 라 그래서 짜첨부디 짜첨부임바 원지 마투니 아니 간주 다 투션 로샤바다 촐라 로샤바디 슈용고요라스라 인자 베나기다 gen korang wodo de ngala somba samji ngi lamso ta nga thasal de de wanza ta hako tugur wasara ta nga dawji gi ani gen chunju wodo ma china kyan sola ya gen chunju korang gi ani ngala ya onme ngandi di years lab chini wodo chedi is manzu bebe luxela ya kabu yores ngala ye ngachi ya yin se til lagu mares. And the Chie Roshimbana was Monsia Lagdoda, Angaya Win, Ngala Lobjoy, Nietzsche to said, looks on people the Omares, the Chimares. Is it telling one any Nandel Levit and the Yashudo di Genton recurrence of water children it and the Yashud cigarettes. Go by Yashud Chasons. The cans of Minton in Mount Minton cans of the Pentawars, the rock.
there are many reasons why I'm very, very pleased to have made acquaintance with Gensundru. But the primary reason is is that I have met him here whilst also connecting with you. Because this gives me the opportunity to talk to you very directly in a way that can bring you great benefit. Because our cultures, the Tibetan culture and the Western culture, are similar in some regards, but very different in others. So whilst we are all the same in wanting happiness and to be freed of suffering, and this goes across cultures, through the cultural lenses, we have different approaches. So for example, for Tibetans, we we find it culturally impossible to talk about our good qualities. We find it culturally impossible to push ourselves forward, even for the benefit of others. Westerners, you don't have that constraint. It's very acceptable in your culture to say, yes, in reality, I have these skills, these qualities, this education, and so forth. And one can talk quite freely. It isn't seen as, for example, bragging. But in our culture, this is really just a complete cultural no-no. This we cannot do. So I can talk to you about Gensundru and say very clearly how incredibly fortunate you are that he is here living in your midst. So don't miss out on this opportunity. Having a great teacher nearby, but not connecting with him, not fulfilling the potential of that connection once made, that is such a great loss, such a great loss. So I encourage you to recognize this wonderful opportunity that you have and to embrace it. Don't let it go to waste. Rather, make the very most of it. That's okay.
인자 다 genlaya ong long menga ke jubata ani sam yimme ke batindi ta kanji jawru mu cheda ani kid senjuru mu chini ma gyudebi ani juba chansang yores di kyanzu lent gores taba di lent gores and so da pena menga kid senjuru mu chini gyubi menga tomo mai batindi Geshe kyatan bai genla yores ba ezu kyaranzu shutu gores ani long ta chi long mambu shu pena lojong la so chembi ta long mambu shu tezu shu gores ranganzun onne nanchu chendenji chingi bai na on lo menga gyuba me bai na nanchu gi nyamne chen toba gyula kebadi peshita misig wata wasres ra neighbor to go gores nganzu manche ji ani di che thugma dasra bena long shya da and so ta loma da bale nokse roji shira mundo asra bena lama sobar mujira ben khattu na ta long nang gi asra ta gedu so ya ma shu bana rumuchi ma long nang sha ba chang me ba yor asra tu se be wan ta nganzu roji din 제 신기 말다라 계란 속에 아니 야저 마저나 마나야디 가부요레스 나도도 겐촌들에 계란줄 야 겐촌줄라 아니 제kur 마시나 겐촌줄 갈디 용이 계란줄 나고스 뒤놈이 손 신기 말레스 아니 되니 경술을 알았으나 경 나란술라고 하레스 사자들의 유해등인기 노르부디 소슬레 마도나 소스 겸을 왔을 이 인지민이 제고를 했으라 인기레와 인스
And Sundru in this life has had the remarkable good fortune to receive the three initiations, oral instructions, and personal spiritual instructions from the greatest of masters, of spiritual masters, particularly His Holiness the Dalai Lama, but also Kuti Rinpoche. This is such great fortune. Recognize that he has this incredible training, and thereby he is qualified to pass that on to you. In our Tibetan tradition, perhaps uniquely, we have this emphasis on these three: initiation, oral transmissions, and personal spiritual instructions. And in our tradition, we emphasize all three because all three are well maintained. They haven't been lost or degenerated. And you know about these because the Tsultrim Geshe, he encouraged their importance. He often would give oral transmissions as well as always teachings. Teachings or personal instructions has the same meaning. So he'd often give teachings. He'd often give oral transmissions as well as initiations. So by him living that example, he showed the great importance of these three. Now, I encourage you to recognize, as I said in the previous segment, your great good fortune at having someone like Gensundru here in your midst in Perth. He's not going to push himself forward. He's not going to say, oh, I can do this for you, I can do that for you. You, from your side, have to have the desire, the yearning, and make the request. And if you do so, you'll receive tremendous benefit that will enable your spiritual flourishing for lifetimes to come. If you do not, and you let this opportunity pass you by, if you do not recognize this jewel in your midst and let this opportunity pass you by, the loss will only be yours. So I encourage you to make the most of this opportunity. That's all.
did that did that 먼저 다 난주 지기요라서 견소 넘버 슈거리 난소이나 넘버 인세고리 다 난주 지비 고든 조디 카르레슬라운디 난주 수수 주기 뉴무 파야드렌도스 라 뉴무 파야 디코나레 마도 셴바 셴바 가야면도 왔어요 난주 진 난주 냠네 진 난주 니셰비 아니 또비 연된디 수수규를 끼니 아니 수수규기 니무 메버서야 디다 고비 난 고바츠오디 테레스 다 딘디 용양 난주 니셰비 또비 연데 랑규를 끼발야 왕롱맹아 규바디 메타메레스 딘디 규바 메발야 딘니 송비게 또비 연데 랑규를 끼세바디 시잘 메시거레스로
Sedutama, Yankee Sunglokna?
Nanchu Pita, one manga, Juba Meba, and the Nanchu Nishibi, Toby on the Gula Ki Sigmaris, Kia Yomaris. Is the indication which I was raw.
Everyone here tonight, we are all Buddhists. And we not only are Buddhists, but we are Buddhists who have an interest, a wish to engage or enter into the Buddha Dharma. In other words, to have the minds of the Dharma within us, cultivated within us. And the primary purpose of the Buddha Dharma is to enable each and every being to abandon the afflictions, to completely eradicate the afflictions, and thereby live free of the afflictions. This is the primary purpose of the Buddha Dharma, the primary purpose for cultivating it within. And the way to eradicate the afflictions is the way to eradicate the afflictions is to cultivate good qualities within. In other words, on one's own continuum, on one's own mind, to develop good qualities. We think with an illustration of an old-fashioned scale, as one develops ever greater qualities, so that side of the scale becomes heavier, the side of the scale that is the afflictions becomes lighter or weaker. So the process of eradicating the afflictions comes about through strengthening and developing the quality and the strength of the afflictions on our continuum. And the method to do so, to cultivate all these good qualities within, is to engage in the threefold system of initiation, oral transmissions, and personal spiritual instructions to receive these three. Without engaging in all three, or receiving all three, it's not possible to give rise to good qualities within oneself. It expresses slightly differently. Without receiving those three, it's not possible to give rise to the minds of the Dharma to the extent that one's mind itself is radically transformed into the Dharma. That's all.
nganzu dus pa tewa na ani nanchu chu dog de on dita jangwang mo tsong ba chimbe ani lamram che di chong sam na la ta nanchu chu dog de ni do chen da len cho cho chen song sha ya di cha go res ra di nang du song dang di lamram nang la ya kyu chung di chimbo lam nyam su len chu ramba di sum nang la di yo res de sum du ste on di ge kyu chung gi lam nyam su le ni nang zu lu da nga ki nye che dom ya to nye che dom ya gi da nimbo yo na me na di kyu chung ka ni ra begita
Nietzsche domye, ti drinki minto. Nietzsche?
Nyeba, lu nyeba da nga gi nyeba jora. Nyeba pa kaya gi tabdi, keu chungun shebi, ani lam gi rimba digi, ani lu nga gi nyechu tom go do asra. Ani keu ding ni shebi, lam gi nyamne digi, ani nyumu musun jomya. Ta keu chembu gi lam gi rimba digi, ani nyumu bi shabi pachasana da, ani shiji dribadi. Tibat, ani seyagi. 아니 님부 연하면은디 기우충 쳔부감니 셰비 다 남기 름바디 간지 노르드나 기우충 디 쳔부송기 남냠 렘발라 때니 아니 에 가서다 님무 바차다 쳔바 아니 고야기 탑 데니송고도 왔어라 데니송고레스
Moments ago, I mentioned the very purpose of the Buddha Dharma is to enable beings to eradicate their afflictions on their own continuum. And then how to do so? The Lama Tsongkhapa, the incomparable master, in his Lamrim texts, he summarized the entirety of the Buddha Dharma in a way that is very practical. So Lamrim, or its full name, Janchub Lamrim, means the graduated stages of training the mind to attain enlightenment. So those graduated stages are presented in three general divisions. One starts with the trainings that are shared with the practitioner of initial capacity. That is our foundation, and upon that, when that foundation is built, we develop the trainings which are shared with practitioners of intermediate capacity. And when that foundation, those two now together, are established, one will be successful in the third level, the trainings that are unique to practitioners of greatest capacity. So the reason for this sequence is bearing in mind the purpose of training is to completely eradicate the afflictions and gain freedom from suffering. Buddhahood. That's the purpose. So one achieves it by training in accordance with these three varying capacities, starting with a training of initial capacity or small scope. Here, the trainings come to lead one to abandon the faults to do with physical behavior and one's speech. That's the starting point. One develops one's mind to the extent where one can turn away from harmful physical behavior and speech. Upon that basis, upon the basis of those qualities built within and that process of transformation that's taking place, one engages in the trainings associated with the practitioner of intermediate capacity or middle scope. There, one now is focused on abandoning the faults of the mind, so the afflictions. So in this small scope, one abandons the faults to do with the body and speech, and in the middle scope, those to do with the mind, the afflictions. with such a foundation then formed, one's mind is strong and powerful. One is no longer narrow-minded, but as a broad mind and a far-sighted outlook. And that enables one to actually engage now in the trainings of a being of great capacity, the great scope. Here, the objective is to abandon the imprints or the stains of the afflictions, so the subtlest traces of the afflictions, and that is done through the cultivation of bodhicitta. So this is how these three scopes or these three capacities build one on top of the other. And the Lamrim takes us through them in this graduated sequence of training the mind in order to achieve enlightenment. And that is how one comes to fulfill the very purpose of the Buddha Dharma. That's okay.
And the Sanji Jomde Dige, Dibachi and Mishashi, give up some soperchi, Rang Sem the Yonsundur, then Sanji Temba said. La
Yankee Sungla, Chicken Sub Gere.
Dibachi and Mishashi,
Ah,
Odi, the Lamrum give a Dom Rodi Tiredosra. Diba Micha said, Dibachi and Micha said, Digi, Lunga Ginyachut, Lunga Ginyaba Digita, Diba Senata, Lunga Ginyaba Digit in Saroragi. Ani Tirda Lunga Ginyachut Dombaina, Diba Domba Chiba Chagores. Lunga Ginyachut Kamaduna, Ranshinki, Ani Dibumbashi Yong de Chagores. The Lunga Ginyachut Domiag Tap Karesana. 아니 메기주분 수tum 그츠비 아니 수tum 송야디 룽아기 녜주 돈비기 탑 아니 메도모로 왔다 초도 교바디 아니 수tum 송야디 차고레스 아니 산지기 초 나올이야 라바숨 수디온디 라바숨 수tum기 라바데 라바 셴이 땡 송야디 tirda 라 룽아기 녜주 돈비기 탑 아니 수tum기 and Yamlinti. The D Yobaina and tell Tenny Numu Payadi, Yon to Yore, any Numu Panji tap, any Shelf de Yon to Yores. Raw. T Yobaina, tell a Tenny, Numu Bishabi, Tuma Pasha the Cheba Sebi, and Seba and Tarvatoya there, Hilton Yungures. Kanji Lunga in Yechu Domatubaina. Lel Hashudi, Payadi, Lungagi, Panjala, Lungagi Yabata, any Numuta, Numu Visha Pasha, the Rumbosum Roji Yungudosra. The Lel Hashudi, Lungagi Yechu Dometris. Panja Rakshudi, and the Panja Rakshudi, Lel Hashudi, Pamatuna, any Numu Pansed, Shun Kalakavres. The Numu Pamaduna, Numu Visha Pasha, she said, Telekan Yoyamels. Things are not so tambo any two takshu the carchi was lady, Lunga in Yeju don't be tap, and Sutrum layer, Shugadi, the Shinducation which I does drop. And not to Kaduna, so someone didn't give you melody shady years drop. The kitchen should as drop. Kashi and Tsultrim Slam depend on Megichu, Sutrum Soba that chick, and it Kenya Pama Dombosoya Soba, Chignoni, Dombosoya deep, Lelhashiruzi, Nameta, and Dili Ganjila Chisamutani, Chiche Daddy, Yashajataman Nordrogus. Yoya made it Reshas Ra.
Die Tikche de Yankee Sumroknang, die Tikang Sumpa down the similar Charki Yomade. Dikpa Maje, Gewa Sag, Deni.
Rangisem Yosundo, Rangisem, and Sanji Temba.
There's a very famous sutra verse which you would have come across. It's in prayers that you recite from time to time, which is do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your own mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. This is a wonderful verse because it really summarizes the Buddha's teaching so well. So do not commit any non-virtue. Perform only excellent virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So looking at that very first line, do not commit any non-virtue. So here, in the very first line, we are being guided to abandon non-virtue. And the starting point is to abandon the non-virtue that we engage with our body, so physical non-virtue, as well as speech. This is the foundation of restraining your speech so that one's speech is ethical, restraining one's physical behavior so that it is ethical. This is the very foundation. And why? Because if one continues to engage in non-virtuous behavior, one is accumulating causes for suffering and hindrances, obstacles to one's spiritual development. One will stay stuck. One will not be able to spiritually develop because of the ongoing habituation to non-virtue. And the method to change this habituation is ethics, ethical restraint or ethical conduct. And one, as the basis, restrains one's physical and verbal behavior. This is the basis. So you'll know from the three higher trainings, these are again sequential, where with one builds on the other. So the foundation for the three higher trainings is the first, the higher training of ethics. This is the foundation upon which all other good qualities come. Without restraining oneself from non-virtue, in other words, without being virtuous, one will not be able to develop good qualities. One will not be able to abandon the afflictions, which is our goal. And among the different levels of ethics, the simplest, and therefore the one to start with, is to restrain our physical behavior and our speech. Without doing so, we have no hope of being able to abandon our afflictions. So therefore, ethics is the foundation, and the foundation of the foundation is restraining our physical and verbal behavior. Thereafter, one is developing that foundation whereby one can then focus on restraining the mind ethically, in other words, restraining it from the afflictions. Then that will mean one is ready to start actually cultivating the wisdom, understanding, emptiness, and progressing towards the eventual attainment of liberation, liberation from the afflictions, and thereby liberation from suffering. So from what has just been said here, the key points is the foundation of all our training is ethics. Therefore, it cannot be emphasized enough how important it is. And the foundation of one's ethical training is restraining one's physical and verbal behavior. And to do so, the skillful method presented by the Buddha is to receive vows and live within the confines of the vows, seeing the vows as living within the vows, as living in the confines of ethical behavior. With outside those confines, transgressing those confines, one is then abiding in unethical behavior. Hence the great importance and the emphasis of receiving vows and living within the vows. So this is the indispensable ethical restraint is the indispensable foundation for all spiritual development. That's what.
The non to Vana, and Deva singing the Ranching Yunguyasaris, the Gidi Yunguyasaris, and the Ngalaya, Deva country to Gori, Dunga country Segori, Tito Keshe Lavra, Talenta, Deva country to Gori, Dunga country Segori, and they do call the Yungu Tola, Keshe Lavanza. Kanji Lunga in Yeju Dom to Vana. Any tea shugi, any new shukchon down to race. New kazu shukchon drovina, tell it be dunga nyon drovres. Dunga nyon drovina, devil ranshuk tea talaya, devil igremoto, jamba chala shenpachi tsanga jangi che yo marasro. Teta, di imba di, chomden di chu tambo sondi, denpa shi sondi, denpa shi sondi, donghar ki tsaba gyo di kunjung res. Kunjung ka res la wandi le da nyumungi res. Ra, nyumungi tsaba cheni, ani pigi da, ani chawa di, da le les na zo di, kyanza genzong dhuli kishiti da, le sa zo di chawa di res. Lunga ki chawa chiya di da, le re dos. Lunga ki chawa di kunung la teni, ro, kunung la teni yungu yor. Kunung nyumumbi kunin lambi, ani le de la yata, ani le ki chawa de la teni dunga yungu yores. Chamandri bigi netsu, sowa dunga tsamulo, ani chawa marong wajil teni. chawa norwa jila teni, ani tsuwa dunga legi dwasirwa. Susu chawa di rungwa jida, chawa legwa ji cheba ina, lamsa semba kibu yungu dwasirwa. Semna tsuwa dewa yungu dwasiri, di yungu waras. Susu ki mi shengi hama kuwa ina ya, susu chawa nonchu choba ji cheba ina, lamsa semla ya tsuwa madewa ji yungu dwas. Tsuwa dunga ji legi dwasirda. 다 대화도 동아시아디 철로기 유피 무부 아니 지 도도 소리 개 문도 왔어. 서로랑 그랬어. 대도 생도 서로지 돈이 쉐어를 못 하지만 간요 말았어. 소 대도디 자바 야니를 때니 소 대도 레기를 못 잠바 소 대도 레기 규 간요 말았어. 일단 뉴문 비코는 아니 자와도 농주레스. 농주 쇼도르스. 그래서 뉴문 코란 로 노르바진자 다츠 로딩기 로 록시진자 디 원도 송이 자와 노르바지마도 자와 양타바지다 자와 만노르바지 싸우니 용메시 바레스 그래서 될 때도 소와 동하지마도 소와디 마데와지마도 아니 소와 대와다 소와 양타바지 용시 마레스 힌디지 용구 여바나 아니 균제 생이디 고도 소리 차로 거스로 이요 말스
Living within vows is of great importance because it leads to happiness. So how does it do so? So when one lives within vows, one's physical behavior is restrained. So when one is practicing ethics or ethical restraint and living within vows, one's physical behavior is restrained. In other words, it's restrained from engaging in non-virtue. One's speech is also restrained from engaging in non-virtue. And as one trains, one's mind too starts to be restrained from the afflictions. This is the process by which happiness is achieved. And how so? Because this is the process that weakens our afflictions. This is an important point to understand. The afflictions cause our suffering. To the extent our mind is afflicted, we suffer. The more afflicted our mind, the greater our suffering. The less afflicted our mind, the more at peace it is, the more at ease it is, the happier it is. So therefore, one can determine whether one is happy or suffering by the presence or absence of the afflictions. And if they're present, we can determine the strength of our suffering by the strength of those afflictions. This is a key point, because it makes it very clear the need for ethical restraint, where one restrains the mind from afflictions or afflicted behavior. So when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, he taught the truth of suffering, and then he taught the cause of our suffering, true origin. So I know Gensundru taught this recently, or reminded you of this recently, and that true origins is contaminated karma and afflictions. It's from these that we suffer. And he also, Gensundra also spoke to you about what is karma. So karma the word for karma is also the word for action or activity. And here we would mainly think of physical and verbal action. But it also encompasses mental action or activity, because each movement of our body or expression of speech or expression of sound has a motivation. And motivation is, of course, an expression of mind, or an instance of mind, rather. And this is how karma is created. This activity of the mind is motivation. And that is the creation of karma. And that karma leads to the experience of happiness or suffering. Happiness or suffering is what follows the karma that we create. This expression of the motivation, this mind, and it's perhaps it's resulting, if there is resulting, physical and verbal behavior. Here, what you each need to see for yourselves is that how behavior, physical, mental, verbal behavior, that is considered suitable or appropriate for a spiritual practitioner, so in other words, virtuous, leads to happiness. So here you need to watch your mind and see when one is engaging, perhaps only in thought or in speech or in behavior, physical behavior. If the mind is virtuous, one at that time is happy and is creating causes for happiness. One is happy in that moment because of the absence of the afflictions. If the mind is virtuous, the afflictions are absent. And one is creating the causes through this wholesome karma for future happiness. When you notice that, keep mindful of your mental process. And when the wholesome or the virtuous mind is lost and afflictions once again arise, notice how your prior state of mental peace is lost. And if you are now talking or physically acting, notice how that has changed. And in this way, you'll see how suffering immediately follows from unwholesome behavior. Because when one is engaging in unwholesome behavior, the afflictions are dominant, and therefore one is suffering. And not only that, one is creating the karma that will result in future suffering too. The key points that I'm making here is, firstly, happiness and suffering primarily depends on our mind, not on the material world. This therefore needs to be our focus. And secondly, the second key point, to take care of our mind as well as our physical and verbal behavior, depends on ethics. By restraining our physical and verbal behavior through ethics, through the ethical restraint of abandoning non-virtuous physical and verbal behavior, by getting skilled in that, we are preparing ourselves with a deeper level of ethics, taking care of our mind, ensuring our mind is not under the influence of the afflictions. And that is where we're taking care of our motivation, and therefore ensuring that the karma we create is virtuous, and it is the causes, only the causes only for happiness. And that's one trains like this. One becomes ever happier. Why? Because the mind is ever more or more commonly virtuous, or to express it slightly differently, the mind is more commonly freed of the afflictions. Therefore, the mind is happier, more at peace. So this is how cause and effect leads to happiness and abandonment of suffering. That's what can.
Adir danganzula dewa guguyor asra dunga guguyor marata samago danganzu socha samago ta chikba chikyan yimbati dewa dunga mendeva ta man sama chikguriyo dewa tirwasta tinza ta dewa guguyor bayna nyumu mewa soya tireshas ra nyumu kadzu nyong tantu bayna sozu gi nyumu kadzu nyong tantu bayna ani dunga nyong progore devamang rogores. Kanji nyumu nyon tamatuna, nyumu la ya deschi never tamatuna, and they give some so young said, Savani missing watches. The nyumu nyon tang tap the cars, no, Sanji Davis. Sanjom de gesture Teres. Timodo tabshi shambo kayo, shambo suchi can zambling long ya, and man tabot tachi, and a kebayin singing, namju singing that shoji yon or the ya. Nyumu nyon tang tabshi jimolo doing Sanjom de mother choyo master. Teaches dreares. The teaches drawing the car sondna. The Lalan chair mother, shambo tabshi yourself.
Chalo kyopo segien. Jogi me. Yeah, carry on paying. Lumlang maso. All of us here, hearing this teaching, everyone in your home, in fact, everyone you've ever known, every being that abides in our world and worlds beyond this, are the same in wanting happiness, wanting to be freed of all expressions of suffering. Wanting happiness, we have to abandon the afflictions. Yeah, I encourage you to really look at your mind and recognize when your mind is less afflicted, it is more at peace, more at ease, happier. When you recognize that, you'll see for yourself the harm that the afflictions do. It will give rise to a stronger determination to be mindful, to take care of our mind, to guard it from coming under the influence of the afflictions, and to follow the training that one is given to abandon the afflictions. Because this is the method by which one attains happiness. And in our world, there are many, both now and in the past, many people who have remarkable skills and knowledgeable about a wide variety of subjects. But none of them have been able to present a system that comes close to that presented by the Buddha for the achievement of happiness. The Buddha Dharma really is something quite remarkable because it is alone in identifying the actual cause of suffering, as well as also presenting the unmistaken method by which lasting stable happiness can be achieved. As one comes to know one's own mind better and recognize thereby the validity of the teachings, one will want to strive ever more to cultivate them within. That's okay.
There the Sanji Chu Gon Taparto. Any Chu Kandaji Manaya, any Numbi Nimbuchagons. And then got Camdro, Sanji Chu Gendu Sumlaya, Caps do it, Camdo Nam Chiavano, Numunion down to us. Numulayan, new to yours, and the Sanji Chum Dindi, Goson Tosung beyond the some Injibana, Ranjing Numunion to us. Sanji Desha Ranjing Numunion to her, and a church conjugita, Yondan Sam to Vana, Numun Newdastra. Kendun Kunjo Yondan Sam to what Numun Newdas. That Jamru Namda Giovanna, Numun Newgor. He told the carters, Susu Deji Pusum Savat Yungores. Susu Deva Mase, Susu Yankolo, any Pusin Sunjay Mainaya, never much of never much of Yungores. Shella Manena, that Tabdon the Tanzan region, the Shella never much enough, the Yakshu Tirendasra. Nanzola Neshe Mountain. Ah, never matching in Michigan that the Yakushure dasra. Suchil never matching in Michigan Devana, Sozun Kiwi Gorastra. Irkazana Numulayan, New Yovanza. In then so directions. Numula 2000 Numulaya Nimbutending in Mijibana, and it's shishing to yours. Kiwiyores. Tomazam Midi, and Jonah Demotoya the cousin Yundenge. 가두는 니무가 니무된 대원사 데려왔어. 먼저 메이바이나야. 아니 지 오늘 자야고 지바이나. 비글로종 쇼지 메바이나야. 그 자야고 지바이나. 미참하게 아니 가오 용사지 차고랬어. 통과 쌈이는 비 시신도만 통야한테 가서 니무가 니무된 대원사 데려와도 연세 심부 가요 말했어. 동바스는 니무가 니무된 데려왔어.
In terms of which teachings from the Buddha lead to the abandonment, or which teachings serve as the antidote to the afflictions, well, every single teaching the Buddha gave serves as an antidote to the teachings, because the Buddha Dharma is, by its very nature, wholesome or virtuous. Thereby, whichever teaching one is listening to and thereby is arising in one's mind, or reflecting on and thereby arising in one's mind, these are virtuous thoughts, wholesome minds. And it is virtuous thoughts that serve as the antidote to non-virtuous thoughts. So last week, Gensundu spoke about refuge. So if in that teaching, when you're listening to, for example, the qualities of the Buddha, or if you're reading about the qualities of the Buddha jewel, and you're engaging with what you are hearing or reading, that is the process by which they arise in your minds, these wholesome, virtuous thoughts. Whilst one is doing that, one's mind is not afflicted. One is happy, and one is creating imprints or lasting happiness. So too, if one is hearing or reading or reflecting on the qualities of the Dharma jewel or the Sangha jewel, this is a process where one's mind is engaged in virtue, and virtuous thoughts are the antidotes to afflictions. Thereby, one becomes happier in the moment and creates causes for future happiness, imprints that will lead to lasting happiness. And in the precepts or the commitments of refuge, the one associated with the Dharma jewel is do no harm, or do no harm to others. This is a remarkable teaching, just that. If one can refrain from harming others, one's contribution to peace is already immense. If you, as a single individual in your community, refrains from bringing harm, you are contributing to harmony and intercommunal peace with those with whom you interact. Your mind will be in a better place. Others who interact with you, their mind will be more at peace too. And thereby through them, your endeavors will have a beneficial impact on others too. This is how, by each of us as individuals, subduing our mind, transforming our mind, has a beneficial impact on others, living within this one refuge precept of do not harm others. And this simple refuge precept is the very start of the abandonment of our afflictions, because one will start with refraining from physical behavior that brings harm. Add to that verbal speech that brings harm. This enables us to focus on our mind so that our thoughts do bring no harm either. This is the abandonment of the afflictions. So, an ordained person who, whether educated or not, an ordained person living within this precept is liked wherever she or he goes. Wherever she or he goes, people like them, respect them, treat them with kindness, and enjoy being in their presence. Why? Their mind is the light, at peace. It's not afflicted. That's all.
Tedinzada nyumu ngwe singo wares. Right? Nyumu nyong tayela nyumu ngwe singu dasra. Ta nyumu ngwe simbala sangi ge sonshabe nilu pena demba shigi ani nilu tawati chi yabuji mashina nyumu ngwe siya di shindu nikala kabures. Ta nyumu ragba dindi ta nganzu kyula ya chikpina chakdo dan, jensem dan, chik doshala sobe ragba dindi jora ta tuzo da ani denjin nilu majana ngwe es tsor sigir da ina ya ngone chani ge nyumu singe di kanda chi me ro nyumu singe lo di kanda chi me igi yu la ya kanda chi tagi yu me di yu la tatsu di ni shinju lo shubare do yang dawa tagi do tinji pe ani nami yang dawa chi shimba la ya denjin nilu majana ta meba tindi chi res ta denjin nilu jangba la ya denjin nilu shinju ma lo tengin ge ngone Geshe ninjila matena denji nelu shing mares. Ya denji nelu deng la.
Dukidu. Dokpa kiasong, dokpa chesong.
Ya war. Inza ta dia Geshe nindi sosu gi laba song gi nyamne tsujin de che dengi. Ge zonong gu domba tsujin de song dengi. Ani pe laba lobni tsujin de che dengi gi Geshe ni dindijile teni. Ani jangi imba na gyacha gyatamba. Ani shintu gres.
Die tamakashing e amso komason, ngazo geweshenien matena, ngazo denshi, hago sikimare,
denjin nilu shinji malawa tengi geginjila ya matena denjin nilu shin tung mares.
de charne, kadigan petsans shempasung song.
Itsarni ten gewi shingi ten suzugi nji getsonongi domba tsujin du song dengi. Ani gewi shingi ten su yo dengi. Lawalongi tsujin du che dengi. O dindigi gewi shingi jila teni nangchu chik janga yinba na gyachi gyatamba teni nangchu di suzula ya karso da pento tuwa nangchu chik shingres.
It's imperative to come to identify the afflictions and to to recognize them within you, to identify them within you. If one does not identify the afflictions, one will not be able to abandon them. And if one only knows them or identifies them or recognizes them on a coarse level, such as with anger or jealousy or pride, one will struggle to go beyond addressing that coarsest expression of the afflictions. One will struggle to go to even slightly subtler expressions of those same afflictions. So identifying or recognizing afflictions is really important. And to do so, one needs to know the Four Noble Truths very well, the Four Truths or Aryas very well. Because it's through the process of understanding the Four Noble Truths that one will come through the process of coming to know the Four Noble Truths. One will be able to look within one's own mind in ever more detail and recognize how the afflictions arise. You'll see those habit patterns or those triggers, what leads to the rise of your afflictions, and you'll recognize how that harms you. And thereby, you'll recognize what those temporary situations are that trigger you, that cause a disturbance of your mind. And by training in the Four Noble Truths, it won't just be these coarser levels, the obvious things, but the subtler levels will start to become clear. To understand the Four Noble Truths, one has to rely on a teacher, on one's spiritual teacher. Without doing so, trying to do so on one's own, one will not have success. It just will not happen. One has to rely on a spiritual teacher. The benefits of relying on a spiritual teacher are numerous. And through relying on a spiritual teacher, receiving vows from them, receiving vows of the ordained or the non-ordained, as well as receiving teachings and guidance in this way, so much benefit will come. And the benefit that will come is via your trust or faith, your trust in your spiritual teacher, your sincere respect for him. The teachings he gives, you'll know is personal advice for you, and you'll strive to cultivate them within in the way he's guiding you. This is what will enable the teachings of the Buddha to arise in your heart. This is how you receive the blessings of the Buddha. That's okay.
The church in the Shavana.
If you have some questions, then please ask.
Sanjay de la church is samaris.
Jagia Toklamindo.
Chodos, yeah.
Ayapoto.
Yeah. You can use this. Yeah.
Thank you, Geshe, for your talk. If I understand you correctly, you're saying if you just focus on your positive qualities, they will automatically remove your afflictions, or do you also need to focus on your afflictions and antidotes?
Gomason. I'm sorry, it didn't come through too clearly. It didn't quite make it all the way to Bendigo. So could you say it again just for your distant friend?
Right, again, can you hear that okay?
Yeah, let's try.
So is it correct that by focusing on your positive qualities, that will remove your negative afflictions? Or do you also need to focus on negative afflictions and antidotes?
Oh, a negative and antidotes. Okay. Okay, so before I translate your question, the word, it's not the word focus, but rather develop. So develop your positive qualities. So that's how I'll be translating it, because that's the word that is used. Okay, so that will also then come back in the answer. Then it salpogona, then it so in gewa sem chikpu drup godepe yang mena so yang niempo nyon mongi niempo drup godepe so gesem chikpu drup godepe yang mena so yang nyon mongi niempo yang drup godepe.
Maybe some yeah. You mean said the get some of the locks your project. Some figure. In Jimar, you mean nimble haji, get some saji, your bodies. Then you begin nimble, dropping some was down to one at the till luck and get some tragic, till luck get some tragic, your bodies. Okay.
The two virtuous minds or wholesome minds and the antidotes to the afflictions, there's no difference between them. Virtuous minds are antidotes to the afflictions, and antidotes to the afflictions are virtuous minds. Now I'll express the same thing a little differently. Every virtuous mind, in other words, every mind of the Dharma, is an antidote to the afflictions. Does that answer your question? Or I guess it's going to continue.
Yeah, this was that. Give you pay on this. Imado Chadangi Gesam Samgi Benadangan Chanju Long Chimbolaya, the Soyer Rasra Gesam Samgi Shushu Han Science Gear Somebodies Tavadang Tamji Kimbi Gulayan Rotungi Gesam Jimena nyumu bi nimbo la yan rotungi gesum jimena jemba tsama anin kowa keji gyuchagres kanji kowa keji gyuchagres son yorwasro kowa gebayna dunga yong yajre mato ani tendu dewa yong yomarwas nganzula tendu dewaji koyenza girwa mebi dewaji koyenza ani nyumu bi nimbo la yan rotungi gesum ji kegoyate shindu kechimures
That being said, we can divide virtuous minds in the entirety of virtuous minds into two. Mere virtuous minds. So this is like mere here means is a diminutive. So like merely that. So mere virtuous minds and virtuous minds. So mere virtuous minds are virtuous minds, but they have as their objective things associated with this life. So such minds are virtuous, but they're not going to lead to actual lasting happiness. They will not be a cause that eventually leads to lasting happiness of liberation, because they are focused just on this life or associated just with this life. Whereas the trainings from the Lamrim, on the graduated stages of the path to enlightenment, these are all focused on goals beyond this life, starting with the very next life, and then leading to liberation and enlightenment. So the same virtuous mind, but generated in the context of wanting to attain a good rebirth, or wanting to attain liberation, or wanting to attain enlightenment, that same virtuous mind is much more powerful if it has that as its motivation, or that's associated with it or conjoined to it. So in other words, a mere virtuous mind is associated merely with this life. But if that same virtuous mind is associated with wanting to achieve liberation, that same virtuous mind is so much more powerful, and that really serves as an antidote to afflictions because of its strength. Lasso. 상이 속에 그런 디콜을 만보숨 게래.
나 비슷한
Okay, then thank you. Finished?
Geshe, with the vows, if you take a commitment, I've heard about that. If you, by the power of the vow, you create positive karma, positive virtue. So, but if you don't take the vow, you don't. Well, if you don't take that, receive that vow, then I just have a question. Why is it from the power of the object that is the reason you receive virtue living within that vow?
인것은
네, 고소. Then 도두스나 돈파 슈나 돈파 마슈나 키파 카리레. 니 도두 랍나. 돈파 슈나 마슈나 키파 카리레. Then 니 고송 돈파 슈나 딱바 게와 사기 요래. 이니 돈파 마슈나 데니 딱바 게와 사기 마레. 카리제네.
domba mashina domba thog mares domba thog mares domba mena ani bena ani Tsultrim gi laba singedi laba song nangi Tsultrim laba di yung mares sanji gi chu nanglo la Tsultrim gi laba di nganzu chi kamba soba pesha wana 아니 찍메 따버디 Tsultrim labati song yores. And 찍메 따버디 매와 차로 그랬어. 찍메 매사 사 다가 사지간에 찍어나 찍어도 루드야기 아니 야차도 마인 걸마도 템부 데투야기 시덴 거로 요마르와스. 디레스 따로 Tsultrim laba 매와이나 and 디 토라야 지 개와 간르지 지 지기 바이나야 템부지다 아니 야부지 용기요 말했어 간지 용기요 말했어
Die selpo gosong kena. Yini dini kare tini dipetse ngalap gen. Nga dompe meken yina. Dini yini nga mi chikyang segio mare. Semchen bu tsama segio mare. Yini gewa sagio mare. Kare tini.
꼴롱
Ne
요
kare
말
tini.
꼴롱 요 말, 꼴롱 끼 두고 말다
Yeah. Dompe sung pe kabla kunlong yore. Jetang motene gewa sagio.
제
So the great advantage of living within vows, so the great advantage of receiving vows and then living within them, so living within that ethical restraint, is that when one takes a vow, when one makes a vow, that's better than taking. When one makes a vow, one is vowing to never do whatever, yeah, never kill and so forth. Because one has created that motivation, I will never kill for the rest of my life, for example. One has this motivation that for this rest of my life, I will not kill. That motivation has an imprint on one's mind, and thereby one, for as long as one lives in accordance with that motivation or that vow, one is creating virtue. Whereas if one, for example, doesn't kill. You could say a good person who doesn't kill people or animals or insects, or one doesn't kill, but one hasn't made this promise. There'll be certain times when one is choosing not to kill, when one has opportunity to, but says, no, I don't want to do it. That's good. But the rest of the time, the thought's not there. So no virtue is created. But when one takes a vow, one is, because of one is making the promise, from now until, depending on the vow, until tomorrow morning or until the end of this life, I will not kill. One is thereby, for that entirety of that period, because of the motivation, creating virtue. And then furthermore, so that directly answers your question. And furthermore, just to emphasize why ethics is so important. It is the very foundation upon which all other good qualities come. Because one is restraining from non-virtue and thereby engaging in virtue. That is the foundation to develop other virtuous qualities. So if we think of the 3 higher trainings, the first is ethics. That's the foundation. And when it's stable and strong, that one is deeply ethical, so one has a deep inclination against physical non-virtue, verbal non-virtue, and perhaps even against the afflictions. One is so ready to develop the next higher training of concentration, which is indispensable to actually realize the 3rd higher training in wisdom. Lasoken, selpo, lapi.
단다 개와당 미기와스 어느 딕바당 지세 디소 참 꼴롱라야 꼴롱라 되고도 하스라 꼴롱라 되고요레스 꼴롱 맹인기 자와진 바이나 텔라 기디기 남자 샤투 샤요 말했다 간지 다 꼴롱 싸워니니 맹인지 바이나 꼴롱 나 domba domba shundu gu kolong mengi jin bai na domba shundu gu kolong mengi jin bai na ta dipeshi tela ani nang domba la rimba mambu yungro da kanji domba shundu gu kolong mengi jin bai na tela ani ji gewa drumdu gu kolong peshi yonsig mares kawar wa a yonsig mares ta dindri ji mengi ji gi chawa karichi bai na ya chawa di gewa landroya di shindu nikala kawres
Whether something is virtuous or non-virtuous depends on the motivation. So it depends on the motivating mind. This is important. And if something is done, and it's done physically or verbally, and it's done in a way that you could say there is no motivation, there's no real thought process going behind it. No, at a subtler level, sure, but not a real thought process going into it. So you could say without a motivation, not much of an imprint is left from that. So therefore, when one engages in something that from an outside perspective seems virtuous, but it's been done without, say, much of a motivation, it's not going to accumulate much in the way of virtue. Whereas, if that same activity is supported by a vow, that will lead to the accumulation of great virtue, because that vow abides on the continuum. That motivation that was taken some time before, when the vow was received, that, for example, I will not kill for this life, for that life, then that motivation abides on the continuum, and therefore virtue is accumulated. So these two are vastly different, whether there is a motivation or the quality of the motivation or not. That's all.
그잖아. 예, 아니 지기다.
Following on, same idea with the vow, it said sometimes the vow is an actual substance, is an actual form. In Geshe vow.
Bini Drupta Kashi Dompa Suk Segere. Die Suk Yena Mina die Sungrukna.
안다 소들 동바다버디 주 드위 쇼니 송여로 하스라. 소들 동바다버디 수 샤기요레스 베는 드위 쇼나고. 간스나 소들 동비 멘트 초디 르당가기 아니 녜쮸 디데. 소들 동비 멘트 초라 르가기 녜쮸 디데 샤고레스. 르가기 녜쮸 domya koran sukjen yinza, sukjen jinza, tikka bige domba tiyan zuk cha gugundu seni, da kanji duwe shonga di song yores. Da garan ke lenba yina, tilan nenga yo mares, rwa. Da janju sembe domba rawina, sem rangi songja chagwanza, di suk shag mares. Sanga ke domba tawa, sodar ke domba di, domba sukjen yinsa, domba di, sodar ke domba rang le ngunzi che adres.
Kondo. Sangak dan sansu kiskem Dompa denso sukmare,
Suk
konso
mare.
shepe sung pimpe.
Demin düşe şanı çıkırada.
Ale Dempedusi. Goso. Jodi alapki yina mina yamina chitang segiobe. Di
Çıdan la mı
chitang.
Ya.
Chigida. In the Abhidhamma, the Abhidhamma texts, it's stated that individual liberation vows of the three classes, just the individual liberation vows, are subtle form, not coarse form, but subtle form. And the reason they present is that the individual liberation vows restrain physical and verbal behavior. As physical and verbal behavior are form, then the vow that restrains physical and verbal behavior is necessarily form. So that is the reason that is presented in the Abhidhamma for the individual liberation vows. To be honest, if you believe this or not, it's not a crucial point. Furthermore, the Bodhisattva and secret mantra vows, those aren't stated to be a subtle form, but non-associated compounded phenomena. So of the three classes of impermanent phenomena, they are not matter or form, but are non-associated compounded phenomena. That's all. So those were the vows of the Bodhisattva and secret mantra. That's all.
하시나. Thank you.
Thank you, Jiao.
Okay, so we will dedicate page 8, first 2 verses. Pray for the long life and tolerance of their own. Page 10, the faith and sweet return of Rams of Village.
No need. Thank you.
Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious one for darkness and practical goodness. Victorious Lord, Son, Father, and Sons, along with the village chancellors, all the objects of refuge of the light. Please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now, holding and spreading with these precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice. You hold the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Lord, to you I make confess. While striving, single point to thee for sake of the victorious one's teachings, the soul gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge from other living things, who suddenly departed to peace, what a great loss. Nevertheless, through the unceasing truth of the blessings of the ocean of the rituals, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, and has smiled by giving conditions to the big glory for fortunate disciples. And on my faith, tenderness, Lord of Dharma, with accordance to the various institutions of those who visit you, and makes the reading of the life of your world's spoken fast, the sacred gain of tradition, essence of mercy, all us and holy Dharma to you, for us. We make this supplication of Dharma, peace.